ask questions. So, Madame Monestes, if you please. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Senate committee for your invitation and for hearing from us. So, I'd like first of all to talk about the international requirements of the federal government when it has to do with women, especially the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and also compensation for discrimination against women. We see in the bill, they quote the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but we don't see any compensation for women who have been victims of violence, although it's a very central issue as we talk about this kind of violence, especially conjugal violence, marital violence, and would also have to do with deciding on child custody. So we'd like to talk about various aspects of this bill, including those that require communications between spouses, and also in certain aspects of the cooperation expected of parents during a divorce. This can hide the fact of marital violence and could put women and children in danger. The broad definition of family violence shows that there is an understanding of the very complex and omnipresent aspects of family violence, and we feel that the bill should be one that represents this. There is also the repercussions of past violence and even cases of sexual violence, and these are things that are not always there at the beginning of divorce proceedings. There's also the fact that violence between ex-spouses often intensifies following a separation, and during this period, this is a period which is where women and children are at greatest risk. So we would like to require, or requiring, that women having to continue to communicate with former spouses is not only in these cases inappropriate, but can be dangerous. We see that there are mothers who are legitimately incapable to deal with a former spouse and may even lose custody of her children to a possibly violent spouse. We also have concerns shared by many researchers who note that many stakeholders, many interveners contest what a woman says. And we often see that there is violence against women or pressure put on women to give up custody. This becomes a no-win situation if the woman victim of violence knows that her children have been the witness or a victim of violence. She may lose custody because she wants to ensure their protection. But if she denounces the father, even in those cases, she may lose custody. It is said that when there is contact between the child and the violent spouse, there is not enough to prevent contact. Ms. Boyd said that participation of both children in raising a child could make it such that it's better to live in a broken family than one where there is the possibility of violence. Communication must remain flexible, and communication should not be required where there is any any criminal antecedents or antecedents of violence. This would exclude legitimate defense, but there seems to be a lack of understanding of how women survive and resist family violence. There are certain models of coercion and control which would help courts to understand the dynamics of conjugal and family violence and make sure that these women who are victims of conjugal violence won't continue to be victims of family violence. We'd also like to see a change to things having to do with custody and visitation rights. Those spouses with custody have decisions to make, and the visitation rights should be specified in greater detail in the bill. I'd also like to add a point with respect to the regulations. We propose that rather than requiring that legal counsel, or we require that the bill be revised in order that both parties be aware of all mechanisms of dealing with the situation be made clear, and that women be aware of all the processes that are available, and that they understand those things that are most appropriate for their situation. We feel that this is not sufficient in the bill, and that solving or dealing with family conflict, including in cases of family violence, where a woman's psychological and physical state is become more fragile. So we agree with the introduction in the preamble of a definition of family violence, but it also has to be understood that in cases where there are lawsuits over custody under the Divorce Act, these are often cases where there is family violence, and there has to be a gender-specific, the gender-specific aspects have to be factored in. And this has to be considered in the continuum of the spectrum of violence violence against women. This would be a way of better understanding and deciding what the interests of the child are. When there is family or conjugal violence, there should be a way of deciding about how to assess the child's interests, and for us this is of utmost importance. Now, and I think that we really, this should not be delayed. This bill should not be delayed, because we need parameters to decide the best interests of the child. So I'll end there and can continue on after.